A restless summer morning. Thunder shakes the courthouse windows as Officer Hannah Collins steps inside, her loyal K9 Max at her side. Just another day, until Max stops cold in a packed courtroom, ears pricked, eyes locked on the judge's bench. No one expects what happens next. Max ignores every command, lunges forward, and uncovers a terrified little girl, Lila, hidden in the shadows, clutching her stuffed rabbit as the storm outside breaks loose. That single act doesn't just save a child. It cracks open a battle about loyalty, healing, and what real justice should look like. This story will challenge your heart, then show you how hope grows, even in the hardest places. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or state below. And if you believe quiet courage can change a life, please like, subscribe, and join us for more stories of hope, healing, and true connection. It was a restless morning in downtown Indianapolis, the kind of summer day where the humidity made every shirt cling to your back, and the sky pressed low and heavy over the city. Officer Hannah Collins rolled her neck, trying to work out a knot of tension as she pulled up in front of the Marion County Courthouse. The city's courthouse always had its own pulse. Security guards at the front steps, protesters with signs just past the barricades, reporters huddled under umbrellas, and today, thunder rumbling in the distance, just loud enough to set nerves on edge. Hannah stepped out of her cruiser, checked her duty belt, and reached for the back door. In the back, Max, her 4-year-old German Shepherd partner, was already up on his paws, tail thumping softly against the crate wall. Max's brown and black coat gleamed despite the gray morning, and his ears were pricked forward, every muscle alert. "Ready for work, buddy?" she murmured, opening the door. Max leapt out, sitting immediately at her heel, nose twitching as he took in the scents. The old stone, wet grass, fear, adrenaline, and the coppery tang of a coming storm. Inside, the courthouse was a hive of tension. The air conditioning couldn't quite mask the smell of old paper and coffee. Bailiffs nodded at Hannah and Max as they walked in. Everyone knew the pair. Max was the courthouse's unofficial ambassador, a calming presence in the middle of chaos. Today, however, even Max seemed unsettled. His body was tense, almost vibrating. As they waited in line for the security check, Hannah noticed he kept glancing toward the upstairs corridors, his hackles twitching every time thunder boomed outside. Hannah reached down, resting her hand on his neck. She felt the nervous energy under her palm, Max's nerves and, if she was honest, her own. "You feel it too, huh?" she whispered. "The storm, the tension, something more." They were scheduled for the most talked-about case of the week, a high-profile custody battle that had drawn cameras and whispers for days. Two families torn apart, accusations flying, and a young girl caught in the middle. Hannah had seen it all before, but every case was a new weight on her shoulders. As they made their way down the marble corridor, a passing attorney brushed by, nearly bumping Hannah's shoulder. "Sorry, officer," he muttered, papers flying in his wake. Max gave a low, almost inaudible woof. They turned into courtroom 3. Already the benches were packed, lawyers conferring in tight knots, reporters hunched over laptops, anxious families with red-rimmed eyes. The judge's bench stood at the far end, dignified, under the glare of fluorescent lights. Just as Hannah and Max reached the front, Max stopped dead. His entire body went still, muscles coiled tight, nose pointed at the judge's bench. For a second, Hannah thought he might be picking up the scent of drugs. Maybe someone had stashed something illegal, but no. His body language was different. Not the sharp focus of a drug find, but a blend of concern and curiosity, almost protective. Max's tail stiffened. He let out a single, quiet bark. The judge glanced up, frowning. "Everything all right, Officer Collins?" Hannah smiled, professional, but her stomach twisted. "Yes, Your Honor. Max is just extra alert this morning. The storm's got him on edge." But Max wouldn't move. He stared intently at the bench, nose twitching. Something was off. A sudden crash of thunder rattled the old windows, making everyone jump. For an instant, every voice in the courtroom went silent, the tension snapping tight as a wire. A child's voice, so soft Hannah almost missed it, echoed from somewhere up front, more a whimper than a word. Max surged forward, pulling at the leash, nose to the floor, muscles bunching with purpose. "Max, heel," Hannah commanded quietly. But Max ignored her for the first time in months. He darted straight toward the judge's bench, tail high, and began pawing insistently at the dark gap beneath it. Several people gasped. An attorney's laptop clattered to the floor. Bailiffs stiffened, hands at their sides. "Is there something under there?" the judge asked, concern flickering across her face. Hannah's heart raced. "I'm not sure, Your Honor." "Max, leave it!" But Max only doubled down, nosing, pawing, whining. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Every eye was on Max and on Hannah. She exchanged a look with the bailiff, who nodded, dropping to his knees. Hannah crouched beside him, peering into the darkness beneath the massive oak bench. A small figure was pressed into the shadows. A little girl, clutching a battered stuffed animal, her face streaked with tears, her eyes impossibly wide with fear. Hannah's breath caught. For a heartbeat, time stopped. Max lowered his head, whining softly, tail wagging in slow, careful sweeps. The room exploded into chaos, shouts, gasps, questions, the sharp click of cameras, all swirling together. But for Hannah, in that moment, all she saw was Max's gentle gaze and the terrified child, two vulnerable souls reaching across a silent divide. The storm outside broke with a roar, rain slashing against the old courthouse windows. Inside, the real storm had just begun. The courtroom, once buzzing with tension, was now gripped by shock. A collective gasp rippled through the packed benches as all eyes fell on the girl huddled beneath the judge's bench. It was as if the storm outside had suddenly broken through the walls, unleashing confusion and fear inside. For a heartbeat, nobody moved, caught between disbelief and a paralyzing sense of dread. Max remained at the center of it all, his big brown eyes steady, his head cocked gently as if to say, "It's okay, I found her." His presence was a tether in the chaos, and somehow that gave Hannah the clarity to act. "Easy, Max. Good boy," Hannah whispered, her voice carrying a thread of calm that cut through the noise. She turned to the little girl, who flinched at the sudden attention, squeezing her stuffed animal tighter, her knuckles white. Hannah crouched low, keeping her hands visible. "Hey there, sweetheart. My name's Hannah. This is Max. You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you." The bailiff, a burly man named Wyatt, looked to the judge for permission. The judge gave a faint nod, her lips pressed in a worried line. "Let's go slow," Hannah said, her voice gentle. "Can you tell me your name?" The girl shook her head, silent tears tracing muddy paths down her cheeks. She seemed impossibly small, as if she wanted to disappear into the woodwork. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, panicked breaths. Hannah glanced at Max, who inched forward, lowering his head so he was almost at eye level with the girl. He wagged his tail softly, then placed his paw, huge, gentle, just within her reach. The girl's eyes flickered to Max. For a moment, The courtroom held its breath. Then, as if pulled by a thread of hope, she reached out and touched his paw. "There you go," Hannah said, barely above a whisper, emotion swelling in her chest. "You see? Max is here for you." Reporters in the back snapped photos, the click and flash breaking the spell. The judge waved her hand sharply. "No pictures! Not now!" The bailiffs quickly ushered out anyone without direct involvement in the case. Meanwhile, parents in the audience began to murmur. The woman on the plaintiff's side, Lila's mother, Hannah guessed, had risen to her feet, her face a mask of panic and relief, her hands shaking. The man on the other side, presumably the father, was frozen, staring in disbelief. Hannah spoke softly again. "Is your name Lila?" She'd seen it on the case file. The girl's head bobbed in a tiny nod. The judge stepped down from the bench, her black robe swirling around her. "Miss Collins, Bailiff Wyatt, bring her out gently." The judge's voice was steady but tinged with concern. Hannah and Wyatt moved slowly, never crowding the girl. Hannah extended her hand, palm open. "Would you like to come out with us? Max will stay with you." Lila hesitated. Then, clutching her stuffed rabbit like a lifeline, she shuffled toward Hannah. Max moved with her, step for step, his big body a wall between her and the courtroom's prying eyes. The storm outside thundered again, and Lila startled, nearly stumbling. Max pressed his side against her, steady and warm. They emerged from under the bench, the girl blinking against the harsh courtroom lights. Her mother gasped and started forward, but the judge held up a hand. "Let's give Lila a moment. She's safe. Let's not overwhelm her." The courtroom was still, the only sound the patter of rain and Max's breathing. Lila stared at her mother, then at the judge, and finally, her gaze landed on Hannah, searching for something solid in a world that had spun out of control. Hannah kept her posture relaxed, but inside she was vibrating with adrenaline and worry. She recognized the look in Lila's eyes, the look of a child who'd seen too much and didn't know whom to trust. Wyatt fetched a bottle of water, handing it wordlessly to Lila. She took it, hands trembling, and drank in tiny sips, never letting go of her stuffed rabbit. The judge turned to the courtroom. "We're going to take a brief recess. Everyone, please step outside except Officer Collins, Max, and the Bennett family." The lawyers gathered their papers, shooting quick, worried glances at one another. Reporters filed out, some grumbling, some whispering furiously into phones. Hannah heard the words "scandal," "security breach," and "miracle dog" tossed around like confetti. As the room emptied, the tension didn't fade. It thickened, growing almost suffocating. Lila's mother, fighting tears, rushed forward and dropped to her knees, wrapping her daughter in a fierce hug. Lila clung to her, silent and stiff at first, but then she melted into her mother's embrace, sobs finally shaking free. The father approached, his voice rough. "Lila, honey." But the girl only buried her face in her mother's shoulder, her small body trembling. The man's face crumpled, and he stepped back, fists clenched. Hannah, still kneeling with Max, felt the ache of old wounds stirring in her chest, memories of her own childhood, hiding in closets during fights, longing for someone, anyone, to find her and say she mattered. Max nudged Lila's knee with his nose. Lila turned, blinking through tears, and for the first time managed a tiny, fragile smile. "Thank you," Lila's mother choked out, looking at Hannah, then at Max. "It's what he's trained for," Hannah said softly, stroking Max's fur. "He just knows when someone needs him most." The judge approached, her usually stern face soft. She knelt down, her robe pooling on the floor, and looked at Lila with gentle eyes. "You were very brave, Lila. Max thinks so too." For the next several minutes, the storm outside was forgotten. The people in the room formed a fragile circle of warmth, pain, hope, and gratitude swirling in the air. Max lay down at Lila's feet, his head resting on his paws, watchful and calm. He would not move until she did. Unspoken questions hung in the air. Why had Lila hidden? What had she overheard? The answer was locked away in the frightened child's silence. But one thing was certain. This case, and this day, would never be the same. And neither would anyone who witnessed the quiet heroism of a dog who refused to ignore a child in need. The courtroom's heavy doors closed with a dull boom, sealing in a hush that felt almost sacred after the whirlwind of the last hour. Hannah, still crouched near Max, drew a slow breath, letting the adrenaline fade and reality settle. The storm outside continued its wild symphony, rain drumming, thunder rolling, but inside, a new kind of quiet had taken hold, full of fragile hope and unspoken questions. Lila sat on a padded bench near the witness stand, her stuffed rabbit gripped tightly in her lap. The fluorescent lights seemed too harsh for her tear-streaked face, highlighting shadows under her eyes. Hannah glanced at Max, who remained at Lila's feet, his tail gently sweeping the floor, his presence steady and unyielding. The bond between dog and child was almost visible, an invisible thread that seemed to anchor Lila in the here and now. Wyatt, the bailiff, offered Lila a pack of tissues, his normally gruff voice softened to a rumble. "You're safe, kiddo. Nobody's going to bother you here." He glanced at Hannah, silently asking if there was anything more he could do. Lila just nodded, rubbing at her nose. Hannah settled onto the bench beside her, keeping her tone light, her posture open. "You did really well back there, Lila. Max and I are proud of you." For a long moment, Lila said nothing. She simply stroked Max's fur, her movements slow, as if she was trying to ground herself. The courthouse, usually a place of stern order and brisk efficiency, had become a sanctuary, at least for now. The judge lingered nearby, her robe draped over the arm of a chair, eyes still fixed on the girl. Every so often she'd look at Hannah with a silent question. Should we press? Should we wait? Hannah knew the answer. Trauma didn't have a schedule. Sometimes the best thing you could do was simply be there. Outside, the courthouse halls were alive with muffled voices, lawyers strategizing, parents conferring with counselors, reporters desperate for an angle. None of that could pierce the little bubble inside courtroom 3, where for a few minutes, time seemed to stretch and soften. "Max looks after me," Lila said suddenly, her voice a whisper. "He knew I was scared." Hannah's heart tightened. "He's really good at that. He helps me too, you know. Some days are hard, and Max always seems to know when I need a friend." Lila's lips quirked into the faintest of smiles. "I wish I could take him home." A bittersweet laugh slipped from Hannah's throat. "Me too sometimes, but he's got a lot of people to help." Lila's mother sat a few feet away, her face pale and exhausted. She watched her daughter with a raw mixture of relief and guilt, clutching a phone in her hand but not looking at it. Every now and then, she would open her mouth as if to speak, only to close it again. The silence was punctuated by the distant squawk of a police radio and the low rumble of thunder. For Hannah, the moment was achingly familiar, waiting for the world to restart after chaos, trying to find something to hold on to. Max shifted, pressing his head gently against Hannah's knee. She felt the weight and warmth of him and was reminded of her own childhood, a blur of difficult days, her parents' fights echoing down hallways, her only comfort the loyal mutt who used to curl up beside her bed. She'd named him Scout, and for years, he'd been the only living creature she trusted to keep her secrets. She looked at Lila. "You know, when I was your age, I had a dog too. He wasn't as well behaved as Max, but he was my best friend. He kept me safe." Lila's eyes grew round. "Did he ever find you when you were scared?" "All the time," Hannah said softly. "He always knew." A flicker of trust passed across Lila's face. She loosened her grip on the stuffed rabbit, letting it rest in her lap. The judge cleared her throat, her voice gentle. "Lila, if you need anything, we're here to help. If you don't want to talk, that's okay. But if you ever feel like it, we'll listen." Lila nodded, not quite meeting the judge's gaze. Her mother scooted closer, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. The storm began to ease, the relentless rain softening into a steady drizzle. Gradually, the sounds of courthouse life drifted back in. A bailiff's radio, the scrape of chairs, the distant ring of a phone. Reality pressed at the bubble of safety, threatening to pop it. Hannah saw the shift in Lila's posture. Her shoulders sagged, the raw fear ebbing away, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. Max sensed it too. He rolled onto his side, offering his belly for scratches, his doggy grin a silent invitation. Lila reached down, hesitant, then stroked Max's chest. The contact, small as it was, seemed to steady her. Her breathing slowed, the trembling faded. Outside the room, tension simmered. Lawyers argued about next steps, about custody, about what would happen now that Lila had been found hiding. Some voices were sharp, others pleading, all tinged with urgency. But here in this quiet corner, Hannah let herself be still. She offered no solutions, no judgments, only her presence and Max's. The judge approached, kneeling one last time beside the girl. "You were very brave, Lila. Sometimes bravery is just holding on until someone finds you. Max is very proud of you. So are we." Lila finally looked up, her eyes shining. "Thank you," she whispered, the words almost lost in the hush. The bailiff gave a low, approving grunt. Hannah smiled, her own eyes misty. For the briefest moment, the world outside, court cases, news stories, thunderstorms, didn't matter. What mattered was the fragile peace in this room, the small victories that came from kindness and patience, and the healing that started, quietly, after the chaos. And as the storm clouds slowly drifted away, a thin beam of sunlight broke through the courthouse windows, illuminating Max's fur and Lila's face, a gentle promise that, maybe, better days were coming. The courthouse, shaken by the morning's chaos, settled gradually into an uneasy calm as the afternoon light grew stronger. After the storm's intensity, the building seemed to exhale, but the ripples from Max's discovery were far from over. The sound of muffled conversation returned to the marble corridors, and the click of shoes and distant slamming doors reminded everyone that the world outside still moved forward. In a small waiting room down the hall from courtroom 3, Lila sat beside her mother, hands wrapped around a cup of apple juice, her stuffed rabbit perched on her knee. The air was thick with exhaustion and relief. Lila's mother, her name was Elise, tried to speak softly, but her worry bled through every word. "Are you okay, sweetheart? Do you want to talk about it?" Her hand hovered, uncertain, over her daughter's back. Lila just shook her head, eyes glued to the floor. She answered in whispers or not at all. Elise bit her lip and brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "We're safe now," she murmured, more to herself than to Lila. Hannah stood in the corner with Max, giving the pair space but keeping watch. She knew from years on the job, and from her own scars, that wounds like Lila's didn't heal in a day or even a week. Sometimes they left a mark you couldn't see. Max seemed to sense the heaviness. He sat close to Hannah, leaning against her leg, tail curled neatly around his feet. A therapist, summoned by the judge, entered quietly, offering gentle words and a box of crayons. "Lila, I'm Lucy. I work with kids here. Would you like to draw?" Lila nodded, shyly taking a crayon. She began to sketch, not looking up. Hannah watched the girl's small, tense shoulders and remembered her own dog from childhood, Scout. He was never allowed in her school or in public buildings, but when Hannah was home, curled up beneath her bed with the world pressing in too hard, Scout always found her. He'd crawl under the covers, lay his heavy head on her chest, and breathe slow and deep until she matched him. In those moments, Hannah learned what safety felt like, a lesson she carried into adulthood, even as her life grew more complicated. Max nudged her hand. Hannah glanced down and found his steady gaze waiting for her. She smiled and scratched behind his ear. "You always know, don't you, big guy?" Outside, the father, Greg Bennett, paced the corridor. His lawyer, a wiry woman in a blue suit, spoke in urgent, low tones. Greg looked pale and shaken, hands shoved deep in his pockets. Hannah could feel his anxiety radiating through the wall. Every so often, he peered through the glass, hoping for a sign that Lila was ready to see him. In the waiting room, Elise watched her daughter draw, shapes, colors, and finally, a small brown and black dog. Elise's shoulders trembled. "Is that Max?" she asked. Lila nodded. "He found me." Her voice was so soft, Hannah almost missed it. "He wasn't scared." "No, he wasn't," Elise said, glancing at Hannah with grateful eyes. "He's very special." Lucy, the therapist, nodded. "Dogs like Max can sense when someone needs help. They're trained, but sometimes I think they just know." She smiled at Lila. "He knew you were brave, even if you were scared." Lila looked up, searching for reassurance. "Is it okay to be scared?" "Absolutely," Hannah answered, her voice gentle. "Everyone gets scared. What matters is that you made it through, and Max was there to help." Elise squeezed her daughter's hand. "You did so well, honey." A soft knock at the door drew their attention. The judge entered, her presence calm and grounding. "Elise, Greg would like to see Lila if she's willing. No pressure, just a few minutes. I'll stay here with you both." Lila looked at Max, then at her mother. Elise bent down, whispering in her ear. "If you want, I'll stay right beside you, and Max too." After a moment's hesitation, Lila nodded. "Okay." The judge nodded and Greg entered, visibly struggling to keep himself together. He knelt a few feet away, his voice unsteady. "Lila, I'm so sorry. I never wanted you to be scared." He glanced at Elise, then at Hannah and Max. Lila didn't answer right away. She turned to Max, running her hand down his back, as if gathering strength from his quiet steadiness. Finally, she whispered, "You can sit here, but Max stays." Greg nodded, tears in his eyes. "Of course, honey." As the family tried to bridge the gap left by misunderstanding and pain, Hannah watched quietly, feeling the old ache in her chest. She knew too well how families could be torn apart by things unsaid, and she knew, deep down, that healing started with the smallest gestures, a gentle word, a dog's nudge, a hand held steady through a storm. Time passed in measured heartbeats. Lila answered a few of her father's questions with shrugs or short replies, but she didn't shrink away. Max's presence was a steadying anchor, and Hannah could see the relief in Greg's posture as he realized his daughter was still reachable, if only by inches. Soon, the judge announced it was time to return to court. The therapist gathered her things, and Elise hugged Lila, whispering, "I'm proud of you. Whatever happens next, we'll be okay." Lila stood, a little taller than before, with Max by her side. As they filed into the corridor, Hannah caught her reflection in a glass pane. Her own face, older and steadier, Max at her heel. A living reminder of all the dogs who'd carried burdens alongside their humans. "Let's go, partner," she whispered. And together, they stepped back into the bright hallway, ready to face whatever the next hour would bring, bound by trust, loyalty, and the hope that even the deepest wounds could one day begin to heal. As the hands of the courthouse clock pushed closer to noon, the world outside had returned to its workday rhythm, but inside courtroom 3 something had shifted. The room no longer buzzed with the nervous anticipation of the morning. Now the air was thick with the lingering aftertaste of shock and uncertainty. When everyone was called back in, the judge's voice was firm but measured. "Thank you, everyone, for your patience during this unexpected recess. I'd like to continue these proceedings with the well-being of all present in mind." Max walked in at Hannah's side, his head held high, every inch a professional. The eyes of the room followed them, some in admiration, others with wariness, and a few with open suspicion. Max ignored them, focusing on Lila, who sat near her mother at the front, shoulders tense but face dry of tears. A tall, silver-haired attorney for the opposing side stood up as the judge signaled for order. "Your Honor, before we proceed, I must address a matter of procedure. While we all appreciate Officer Collins's heroics this morning, the continued presence of her K9 in the courtroom poses a significant distraction. My client has expressed concern." The judge raised a hand. "I understand, Counselor. Please be brief." The attorney pressed on. "Of course, Your Honor. Allowing a police dog, no matter how well trained, could influence witness testimony, prejudice the jury if this were a jury trial, and disrupt the decorum of the court. We respect Officer Collins, but rules are rules." A low murmur of agreement drifted from a few of the more traditional lawyers in the gallery. Hannah felt her spine stiffen. She'd been through debates like this before. Some people simply didn't trust what they didn't understand. From the plaintiff's table, Lila's mother's attorney, a young woman with a steady, empathetic gaze, rose to respond. "Your Honor, with respect, I would argue the opposite. Max's presence is demonstrably helpful, not harmful. He clearly provided comfort to Lila during an extraordinarily stressful moment, and he is trained for exactly this kind of situation. Removing him now could have a negative impact on her ability to participate in these proceedings." The judge glanced at Hannah. "Officer Collins, your thoughts?" Hannah stood, heart pounding. "Your Honor, Max is a certified K9 with specific training in comfort and trauma support for children. He's not here to intimidate or distract, but to give vulnerable people the chance to be heard. If you want, Max and I can sit apart from the parties, but I believe he's a help, not a hindrance, especially for Lila." She risked a glance at the girl, who was staring at her shoes, rabbit clenched in her lap, but whose eyes flickered with hope at Hannah's words. The judge nodded slowly, her gaze sweeping the room. "Thank you, Officer Collins. I have seen firsthand the effect Max had today. I also understand the need for fairness and order. Here's what we'll do. Max will remain in the courtroom, but off to the side near the witness area. If at any time he becomes a distraction, I will revisit this decision. Understood?" The attorneys murmured assent, though the silver-haired lawyer's face remained pinched. With the matter settled, the judge motioned for court to resume. The bailiff led Lila gently to the witness stand. Max, following the judge's order, took a seat a few feet away, his posture relaxed, but his eyes keen, always glancing at Lila for any sign of distress. Lila clutched her rabbit and took a shaky breath, the microphone looming in front of her. The judge's voice softened. "Lila, you're very brave. You don't have to answer anything you don't want to. We just want to understand what happened, in your own words." The first few questions were gentle, about school, her favorite things, how she felt that morning. Lila's answers came in shy fragments, but each word was steadier than the last. Every so often she'd look over at Max, who'd wag his tail or tilt his head, as if sending her silent encouragement. But not everyone in the room was moved by the sight. The defense attorney pressed, "Lila, when you hid under the judge's bench, were you trying to avoid seeing your father? Did anyone tell you to hide?" The words were sharp, carrying the implication of manipulation. A hush fell. Lila shrank a little, fingers digging into her rabbit. "I was scared. I just wanted to be somewhere safe." The judge leaned in, voice gentle. "Lila, was Max helpful to you?" A slight nod. "He found me. He made me feel better, like it was okay to come out." Hannah felt a rush of gratitude for the judge's patience. But the debate raged on as the day unfolded. During a break, lawyers on both sides argued in the hallway, some claiming Max could sway the judge's opinion, others countering that children's voices mattered more than courtroom tradition. A local reporter, notebook in hand, whispered to her photographer, "I can't believe the story is the dog. This is going viral. Just watch." Inside, Hannah stayed close to Max, feeling both pride and anxiety twist inside her. She knew she'd have to defend Max's presence again. Maybe not today, maybe not here, but soon. There were always skeptics, always rules to be challenged. The day's testimony ended with the judge thanking everyone for their restraint. She spoke directly to Max. "You did well today." Max, ever the pro, just wagged his tail and watched as Lila was led from the stand, a little steadier than when she'd gone up. As the court adjourned for the day, Hannah caught a moment alone with Lila and her mother outside the courthouse. The air smelled fresh after the rain, and the sun broke through the clouds at last. Lila reached down, burying her fingers in Max's thick fur. "Thank you for staying with me." Hannah knelt beside her, meeting the girl's gaze. "You're braver than you think, Lila. Max just reminded you." Lila's mother squeezed Hannah's hand, eyes shining. "I hope they let Max stay. I don't know what would have happened without him." Hannah smiled, standing as Max pressed against her side. "Whatever happens, you have a voice and people are listening now." The courthouse doors swung closed behind them, the debate inside far from over, but outside at least. Hope and courage lingered side by side. News of the morning's events had already spread beyond the courthouse walls. By the next day, the story had leapt from legal circles to local headlines, with reporters gathering outside in the muggy Indiana summer, cameras poised and notepads at the ready. The courthouse, always busy, now felt like a stage, every arrival watched, every interaction noted, as if each person were both actor and audience in an unfolding civic drama. Hannah pulled up in her cruiser, her nerves frayed from a sleepless night spent replaying the details of Lila's rescue. Max seemed tired too, but the moment she clipped on his vest, he perked up, eager for duty. She ruffled his fur. "You ready for another round, partner?" Max responded with a low, happy bark. As soon as Hannah stepped onto the courthouse steps, she was met by a rush of questions. "Officer Collins, is it true the dog found the girl? How does Max know when a child's in distress? What do you say to those who call this a publicity stunt?" Hannah answered what she could, focusing on Max's training, his instincts, and the difference he'd made. Not just for Lila, but for everyone who'd witnessed his quiet strength. Inside, the atmosphere was charged. Security had increased. The courthouse's main entrance was crowded with parents, attorneys, counselors, and, most notably, a group from a local advocacy organization holding signs that read, "Let them stay," and "Therapy dogs heal." Across the street, a smaller cluster held up placards, "No dogs in court. Fair trials for all." Max didn't flinch. As they made their way inside, he ignored the commotion, his focus as always on the people, scanning for distress, offering gentle nudges to those who needed reassurance. Even the security guard at the front desk, usually stoic, paused to pat Max's head and murmur, "Good boy. Glad you're here." Back in the courtroom, things were tense. The judge acknowledged the rising public interest. "Today's proceedings will continue as planned, but I remind everyone, this is about Lila's welfare, not headlines." Her words were stern, but she didn't miss the way Max settled near the witness area, calm and alert. Hannah could feel the strain building, not just in herself, but in everyone. The lawyers' voices were sharper, their arguments more pointed. The question of Max's presence, once a simple matter of comfort, had become a flashpoint for a larger debate. Some lawyers argued that animals like Max brought compassion and accessibility to the justice system. Others insisted they undermined legal procedure and objectivity. During a recess, Hannah overheard a heated exchange in the hallway. "It's not about the dog, it's about precedent," a defense attorney snapped. "If we make exceptions for one child, where does it end?" An advocate shot back. "It ends when courts become places kids can actually tell the truth without being terrified." That's what Max did yesterday. He made it possible for Lila to speak. The stress was wearing on everyone, especially Lila's family. Elise, Lila's mother, confided in Hannah outside the courtroom, voice trembling. "I never imagined things would get this big. I just want my daughter to feel safe." Lila clung to Max, her small hands buried in his fur. "I want Max to stay," she whispered. The judge, aware of the rising pressure, ordered a brief break. In the foyer, a sudden commotion broke out. A dropped bag, its contents spilling across the floor, papers fluttering everywhere. An older man began shouting, red-faced, accusing a teenager of carelessness. The crowd pressed in, tension spiking. Hannah moved to intervene, but Max was already on the scene. He nudged the teenager aside, placing himself between the shouting man and the frightened boy. He sat, calm and unflinching, his presence a silent but powerful command to stop. The man's anger faltered as Max's eyes met his, steady, judgment-free. He took a breath, then another, his voice softening. "Sorry, kid. Bad morning." The crowd dispersed, the tension fading. A social worker nearby leaned into Hannah, awed. "He doesn't just help kids, does he? He helps everyone." Back in the courtroom, Lila's family found new strength. Inspired by Max's support, Elise and Lila both chose to testify about their struggles, not just with the custody battle, but with the pain and fear that had haunted them for months. Elise spoke openly about Lila's nightmares, her fear of loud voices, her history of shutting down when she felt unsafe. Lila, clinging to her rabbit and Max never far away, answered difficult questions with halting honesty. As the judge listened, the mood in the courtroom began to shift. Even those who had doubted Max's place could see the difference he made. He was more than a distraction. He was a bridge, a gentle presence that made healing possible. After court adjourned for the day, Hannah sat outside on the courthouse steps, the Indiana sky finally clearing. Max sprawled at her feet, panting, his work for the moment done. Reporters still lingered at a distance, but for now, the real story belonged to the people Max had helped. A mother and her daughter walked by, pausing. The little girl knelt and hugged Max, whispering, "Thank you for helping my friend." Hannah felt pride surge in her chest, a deep, enduring pride, not just for her partner, but for the possibility of a justice system where courage, kindness, and community could matter as much as law. The courthouse remained, heavy with history and debate. But for one more day, it was also a place where hope, thanks to a loyal dog and those willing to fight for change, had a chance to grow. The days that followed were a blur of headlines and heated debate. Every local paper ran stories about Max, the hero dog, and the frightened girl he'd found beneath the judge's bench. TV trucks parked along the curb. Commentators on radio and social media argued about therapy dogs in courtrooms. Some people saw hope, others saw trouble. But inside the courthouse, life pressed on, and the case at the heart of the storm had reached its breaking point. The judge set a date for the final hearing, and word spread that a verdict was coming soon. For Hannah, the days became a tangle of interviews and legal paperwork. Max's photo appeared everywhere, on news websites, flyers for animal therapy organizations, even a hand-drawn thank you poster taped to a courthouse wall. Hannah saved that one in her locker, but not everyone was grateful. More than once, Hannah overheard snide remarks from defense attorneys or bailiffs skeptical of change. "Dogs in the courtroom. What's next? Story time with cats," one muttered. Hannah swallowed her irritation, focused on Max, and reminded herself why they were there. The morning of the final hearing arrived thick with tension. The courthouse parking lot overflowed with cars. Reporters jostled for space on the steps, microphones angled like weapons. Inside, security doubled. The air in courtroom 3 was electric, every seat filled. Lila's family sat together, pale and anxious, Lila clutching her battered rabbit. Greg Bennett, her father, wrung his hands. Elise pressed a trembling hand to her daughter's back. Max entered, tail low, ears forward. Hannah led him to his spot near the witness stand. The judge nodded in greeting, acknowledging both dog and handler with the briefest flicker of a smile. Even she, usually the picture of composure, looked weary, her eyes shadowed by long nights and heavy decisions. Proceedings began, every voice pitched tense and sharp. Lawyers for both sides repeated their arguments about Max, his presence, his impact, the precedent at stake. The debate was fierce. The judge listened, her face unreadable. But the real test came when the testimony resumed. First Elise, then Greg, each spoke about their love for Lila and their wish for her happiness. The pain was raw, the blame implicit but never fully voiced. The judge asked hard questions. Both parents struggled to answer. Then it was Lila's turn. She sat, legs swinging above the floor, her stuffed rabbit in one hand, the other hand buried in Max's fur. The judge's voice softened. "Lila, You can tell us anything you want. Whatever you say is important. The courtroom leaned forward as Lila hesitated. Her voice was small, but clear. I got scared when people shouted. I thought it was my fault, and I wanted to hide. But Max found me. She stroked Max's head, drawing strength from the steady thump of his tail. He made me feel brave, like maybe things would be okay. He didn't make me talk, he just stayed. A ripple of emotion swept through the gallery. Hannah saw tears on more than one face. The judge nodded, her voice thick. Thank you, Lila. Suddenly, a voice from the back. A relative, red-faced and upset, leapt to his feet. This is ridiculous. It's a dog, not a therapist. You're letting a child run this courtroom. His outburst echoed, shattering the fragile peace. Bailiffs rushed to intervene. Lila flinched, shrinking in her seat. Hannah tensed, but Max was faster. With calm, deliberate movement, he stepped between Lila and the commotion, placing himself as a living barrier. He didn't bark or growl. He simply stared, steady and unafraid, his presence sending a clear message. I will protect her. This ends here. The gallery quieted. The relative, embarrassed, allowed himself to be led away. Silence returned, heavy and thoughtful. Hannah felt a swell of pride and awe at her partner. Max wasn't just doing his job. He was making a statement that no lawyer, judge, or policy could match. Courage didn't always come from arguments or rules. Sometimes it came from standing firm, quietly, in the face of chaos. The judge took a deep breath, voice regaining its strength. I have seen a great deal in this courtroom, but what I've witnessed today goes beyond procedure or policy. Lila, your voice matters. So does your safety. Max has shown us all the power of quiet courage. She paused, looking at both families, then at the attorneys. I will render my decision shortly, but let me say this. The law must serve justice, and justice is not only about verdicts. It's about making room for healing. Today, that space was held open by a dog who refused to leave a child's side, and by a child brave enough to trust again. The judge called a brief recess before the verdict. Hannah escorted Lila and Elise to a quiet alcove, away from the noise. Lila hugged Max fiercely. Elise whispered, "Thank you for everything." Hannah just nodded, unable to trust her voice. Outside, the sky was clearing, clouds parting, sunlight spilling onto the courthouse steps. Inside, a sense of anticipation hung in the air. Whatever the outcome, something had changed. The community had been tested, its values and rules challenged. But amid the storm, there was new respect. Not just for therapy dogs, but for the children whose voices were too often lost in the system. And as the crowd began to file back inside, Hannah looked at Max, his tail wagging, his gaze bright with purpose. For a moment, all the doubt and conflict faded. There was only the quiet knowledge that together they'd made a difference, and that sometimes the greatest turning point comes not from force or fury, but from the simple act of standing by those who need you most. That evening, as the courthouse emptied and the city's rhythm slowed with the sunset, Hannah lingered in the parking lot, waiting for her own breath to steady. The storm that had raged over Indianapolis earlier in the week had finally passed, leaving the air washed clean and the sky painted with streaks of orange and violet. Max lay at her feet, head on his paws, as if he too was reflecting on the day's events. It had been a day that changed everything, not just for Lila or her family, but for Hannah and even for the city itself. News crews still hovered near the steps, hoping for one last comment. Hannah shook her head gently when they called out. She needed space, a moment to absorb what had happened and what it all meant. She clipped Max's leash to his collar. "Come on, buddy, let's walk." The pair set off down a quiet sidewalk, the courthouse standing tall behind them, its windows reflecting the first stars of the evening. For a while they walked in silence, the world settling around them. Hannah breathed in the cool air and let the memories of the day swirl and settle. Max stepping forward to protect Lila, the judge's wise words, the crowd's hush as a child's courage changed the shape of justice. She knelt, running her fingers through Max's fur, grounding herself in his warmth. "You did more than just help today," she murmured. "You reminded us all what loyalty really means." Loyalty, she turned the word over in her mind. Max's devotion wasn't about following orders or earning praise. It was the instinct to stand by someone in their moment of need, to offer comfort and courage without expectation. It was the look in Max's eyes when Lila was afraid, the way he'd planted himself between her and the chaos, refusing to move. It was loyalty that didn't waver, no matter how loud the storm. As they walked, Hannah's mind replayed the smallest details. Lila's trembling hand reaching for Max's fur, the way Elise finally relaxed when Max stayed by her daughter's side, the subtle nod the judge gave as if to say, "Yes, this is what justice should feel like." The courthouse wasn't just a building of laws. It was a place where people's lives shifted, where old wounds reopened and sometimes started to heal. She thought, too, about empathy. Max's courage wasn't about aggression or showmanship. It was in his gentle presence, the way he'd sit beside someone in distress, offering a silent promise. "You're not alone." Hannah had seen it with Lila, but she'd also seen it with adults, lawyers, parents, even the bailiff who, for the first time, had knelt to stroke Max's fur after the hearing. Empathy, Hannah realized, was the foundation of everything Max did. It was the difference between enforcing rules and making space for real understanding. Sometimes courage meant speaking up, and sometimes it meant simply being present, enduring discomfort and pain so someone else didn't have to face it alone. Their walk took them through a small city park, empty except for a few families on the swings and the rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. Hannah let Max off his leash, watching as he trotted ahead, tail wagging, nose twitching in the fresh-cut grass. She let herself sit on a bench, feeling for the first time that week a gentle peace settle over her. A little girl approached, shy, her father watching from a distance. "Is that the dog from TV?" she asked. Hannah smiled, patting the bench beside her. "Yes, that's Max. Would you like to say hello?" The girl nodded and sat, stretching out a hand as Max returned. He sniffed her fingers, then rested his chin in her lap. The girl giggled, all fear forgotten. Her father offered Hannah a grateful smile. Moments like this, Hannah thought, were the quiet heart of community, the tiny, often invisible acts of courage and kindness that rippled outward, changing the places they touched. The case wasn't just about laws or verdicts, but about how people learned to trust each other again, to believe in the possibility of healing. She thought of her own life, the lonely years as a child when her world was uncertain and her only solace had been a dog's unwavering friendship. How many others in the city needed that same gentle reminder? How many carried hidden wounds, waiting for someone to show them the way forward? Not with words, but with presence? Max returned to her side as the sky deepened to indigo. Hannah scratched his ears and watched as the courthouse lights flickered on in the distance, turning the old building golden. She spoke softly, as if telling a secret to the night. Change doesn't always come in loud moments. Sometimes it's just a dog refusing to leave a child's side, or a judge letting a child's voice be heard. Sometimes it's as quiet as hope. Hannah stood, whistling for Max, and the two of them walked home under the gentle watch of the moon. In the stillness, she felt a profound gratitude for Max, for Lila's bravery, for the small army of advocates and ordinary people who'd stood together when it mattered most. That night, as Hannah drifted toward sleep, she reflected on the lessons left behind by the storm. She knew that, whatever tomorrow brought, the courthouse and maybe the city would never be quite the same. Because sometimes, the bravest thing of all is simply showing up and believing that your presence matters. And sometimes, a single act of kindness, a gentle nose, a moment of listening, can send ripples of hope through an entire community. A week after the final hearing, the courthouse felt like a different place. The storm clouds were gone for good, and the marble halls echoed not just with footsteps and legal debates, but with something lighter: curiosity, gratitude, even laughter. Where once there had been only tension and skepticism, there was now a sense of relief, a feeling that something important had shifted. The judge's decision had come swiftly, but not without gravity. In her written statement, she acknowledged both the rules of law and the unique circumstances that Max's presence had illuminated. The order was clear. Lila's safety and voice were to be prioritized, and her family would receive the support they needed. The judge also urged the court to consider implementing a pilot program for therapy animals, citing Max's undeniable influence, not as a distraction, but as a silent advocate for those too frightened to speak. Word of the decision spread quickly, and soon the courthouse was preparing for an event unlike any in recent memory, a community gathering to recognize Max and Hannah for their service. Flyers appeared on bulletin boards. Local news called it a celebration of justice and kindness. Children who'd once hidden behind their parents now tugged on sleeves, asking, "Is the hero dog coming today?" The event was held in the old oak-paneled atrium, sunlight streaming through high windows. The room filled with city officials, courthouse staff, families, and children of all ages. Some had come out of curiosity, some out of gratitude, and others simply to witness what it looked like when the law bent toward compassion. Hannah arrived in her dress uniform, Max at her side. She was nervous, more than she'd ever been for any testimony or patrol. But the moment she stepped into the room and saw Lila waving from the front row, her nerves melted away. Lila's smile was wide and easy, her eyes bright with the kind of trust Hannah hoped would last a lifetime. The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. The judge spoke first, her tone warm and proud. "Justice is not a static thing," she said, her gaze sweeping the crowd. "It lives in our actions, in our willingness to see the vulnerable and to make space for their voices." Max reminded us of that. He gave courage when courage was needed most. The mayor presented Hannah and Max with a plaque. Max, looking unimpressed with the fuss, thumped his tail and leaned in for a scratch behind the ears. Laughter filled the room. Reporters snapped photos, but this time the flashes felt celebratory, not invasive. Then it was Lila's turn. Shy at first, she took the microphone with both hands. "Thank you for helping me," she said, her voice steady. "Thank you for helping my family. I wasn't brave before, but Max made me feel safe. I hope other kids get a helper like him." Her words drew quiet tears from her mother, Elise, and a proud smile from Greg, her father. It was a moment that seemed to wrap the whole courtroom in a soft blanket of hope. After the speeches, families mingled. Children lined up to pet Max, who endured their hugs and giggles with dignified patience. Hannah knelt to talk with parents and counselors who wanted to know more about therapy dogs. The judge chatted with city officials about making the program permanent. At the edge of the crowd, Lila found Hannah and hugged her fiercely. "You're my hero, too," she whispered. And for Hannah, it was more than any medal or commendation could ever mean. As the event wound down, Hannah stepped outside with Max for a breath of air. The courthouse glowed in the afternoon sun, the windows reflecting the gathering of people inside. The moment felt surreal, a place once filled with pain and conflict, now echoing with laughter and gratitude. Max sat beside her, leaning against her leg, his steady gaze on the families streaming out the doors. Hannah scratched his head and let herself relax for the first time in weeks. She thought about the lesson that lingered in her mind, one that the judge had spoken, but that Max had taught without words. Justice isn't just about verdicts or procedures. It's about creating spaces where people can heal, where a frightened child can find her voice, and where kindness is not an exception, but a rule. That day, justice had worn a new face, one marked by gentleness, loyalty, and hope. And it left an indelible mark, not just on Lila and her family, but on everyone who'd watched a simple act of compassion ripple through the halls of power. As the crowd drifted away, Lila ran back one last time, throwing her arms around Max's neck. Her mother hugged Hannah, eyes shining with gratitude. Greg shook Hannah's hand, his voice rough with emotion. "You gave us back our daughter. Thank you." Hannah, humbled and a little overwhelmed, simply nodded. "Max did the hard work. I just held the leash." They laughed, and for a while, they all stood together in the warm afternoon, letting the peace of the moment sink in. That night, after the crowd had gone and the courthouse doors were locked, Hannah took Max for one last walk around the square. The city was quiet, the lights soft and golden. She thought of all the voices that had been raised, the hearts that had been changed, and the hope that would live on long after headlines faded. Justice, she realized, is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's as quiet as a dog lying at a child's feet. Sometimes it's as simple as making room for healing, for voice, for safety. And sometimes it looks exactly like this: an old courthouse, a loyal dog, and a community forever changed by the power of compassion. A month had passed since the courthouse storm, but the effects of that extraordinary day lingered in ways big and small. Sometimes change starts with a single act of courage, a frightened child, a devoted dog, and ripples outward, reshaping not just a courtroom, but an entire community. The city's parks were turning green again as summer deepened, and the courthouse stood as steady as ever, its columns gleaming in the sunlight. Yet inside, the mood was unmistakably different. Smiles were quicker. Parents no longer hurried their children past the stone steps. Instead, families paused in the shade, sometimes pointing to the main entrance and telling their children, "That's where Max helped a little girl." Even the security guards, once all business, greeted visitors with knowing nods, and the occasional treat slipped to the courthouse's most famous four-legged ambassador. On a Saturday afternoon, the community came together for a celebration in the city park, an event dreamed up by local advocates, city officials, and quietly, the judge herself. Flyers called it Hope and Healing Day. What started as a small thank you had grown into something much more. The mayor gave a short speech about courage. Parents and children painted a mural together, each adding a paw print or handprint. Balloons danced on the breeze. It felt less like a ceremony and more like a family reunion. Hannah arrived in civilian clothes, no uniform, no badge, just herself and Max walking side by side through the laughter and music. People waved, called their names, and children ran to Max, arms wide. He greeted each one with gentle eyes and a wagging tail, patient as ever as dozens of hands found his fur. For once, Hannah didn't worry about crowds or cameras. She let herself just be part of the moment. Lila and her mother arrived hand in hand. Lila's smile was brighter, her steps more confident than Hannah remembered. She wore a t-shirt with a cartoon of Max on it, someone's thoughtful gift. Greg, her father, joined them, holding homemade lemonade for the group. The family sat with Hannah on the grass, talking and laughing in the sunshine. When Max flopped down, Lila leaned against his side, her laughter ringing out over the park. The judge visited quietly, blending into the crowd with a relaxed ease rare for anyone in her position. She chatted with parents and counselors, listening to their stories. She'd become more than a distant authority. She was a neighbor now, an ally in the slow work of making justice kinder. Midway through the afternoon, the organizers invited Hannah up to say a few words. At first she hesitated, nerves tightening her chest. But then she looked at Max, sprawled on the grass with Lila and a circle of new friends, and knew the story wasn't really hers. It belonged to everyone who'd lived it and been changed by it. She stood beneath a big oak tree, sun dappling the crowd, and spoke into the portable microphone. I've been a police officer for a long time. I've seen hard days and good days, but I've never seen anything like what happened here a few weeks ago. Max did what he's trained to do. He found someone who needed help and refused to leave her side. It was simple, really. He didn't know about rules or headlines or what people would say. He just knew what was right. She paused, scanning the faces before her. Parents, children, teachers, neighbors, city leaders, and at their center, the girl whose story had brought them together. If there's one thing Max taught us, it's that courage sometimes looks like staying with someone when they're scared, listening when they can't speak, and being steady in the storm. We all have the chance to do that, at home, at work, in our community. And when we do, we make a little more space for hope. The crowd was quiet, listening. Hannah saw Lila's eyes shining, Elisa's arm wrapped around her daughter's shoulders. Hannah continued, her voice gentler now. If Max's story reminds you of someone in your own life, a friend, a teacher, a neighbor, or even your own pet, I hope you'll share it. Tell your story. Listen to others. Every act of kindness, no matter how small, sends ripples we may never see. But those ripples matter. They're how change begins. She closed with a smile. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to comment, share it with someone you love, or even come meet Max and the rest of us here in the park someday. The world can always use more courage, more empathy, and a little more hope. Thank you for being part of our story. Applause rippled through the trees. Lila ran to hug Hannah, then knelt by Max, arms thrown around his neck. Dozens of children followed, gathering around Max as if he were a living legend, which, in their eyes, he was. The afternoon became a festival. Storytelling, games, families reconnecting, and strangers becoming friends. In every corner of the park, people told stories about hard times, brave moments, and the unexpected heroes who had helped them through. As the sun slipped toward the horizon, painting the sky gold, Hannah found herself on a park bench, Max at her feet, and Lila leaning sleepily against her side. The courthouse stood visible in the distance, not as a fortress, but as a symbol, a reminder of what could happen when a community chose empathy over fear. She closed her eyes and breathed in the warm evening, feeling at peace. For all the struggle and pain, the lesson of the courthouse storm was clear. Justice was not just verdicts and laws, but kindness and presence, the small acts that gave people the courage to speak and the comfort to heal. As families gathered for a final group photo, Max sat in the middle, tail thumping, surrounded by laughter and love. The judge smiled, the mayor waved, and Hannah felt the story, her story, Lila's story, Max's story, grow beyond any single moment. That night, as darkness settled over the city, Hannah shared her thoughts online and at the local library's evening gathering, just as she'd promised herself. She told the crowd, "Sometimes the smallest acts, like a dog refusing to leave a child's side, remind us how community, empathy, and courage shape justice. If this story inspires you, please share it or reach out to someone in need. Together, our kindness creates ripples of hope." Max's tail wagged, and in that simple gesture was the promise that no one was truly alone, that every act of compassion mattered. The story wasn't just about one girl or one dog. It belonged to everyone willing to believe that hope, once shared, could transform the world.